have the pleasure of talking to just an incredible colleague. Lucas Joppa is the Senior Managing Director and Chief Sustainability Officer at Haveli Investments. And unfortunately, Lucas couldn't be with us live here today, but he is going to join us virtually. So I met Lucas very early in my journey on the CSO path, and he is just a wealth of knowledge, very intelligent and deep background, so I'm excited to talk to you today. So thanks for joining virtually. Can you hear us okay?
I can. Can you hear me?
Excellent, excellent. All right, so we got a room full of folks here who are anxious to hear what you have to say, so we're gonna get started. So one of the things, certainly in your background, you moved from one of the leading companies from an environmental strategy standpoint at Microsoft to the realities of private equity and climate-focused investing. So what surprised you about this transformation or this transition, and what did you leave at the door maybe as you left your last role?
Sure. Well, first, before I answer that question, I'll just say I'm extremely sorry I'm not there in person. I was supposed to be there in person. I had plane tickets and everything, and then I snapped my leg in half, and so there we go. So you don't get to see me hobble up onto the stage. But for those of you who maybe have met me before, you know that these things are kind of, this is just the latest in a long litany of injuries in my personal life. And I was actually flashing back a little bit on sustainability last week when it happened, and ended up having emergency surgery and blah, blah, blah. I won't bore you all with it, but as I was coming out of surgery, the doctor pulled my wife aside and he said, you know, just so you know, with injuries like this, oftentimes it really changes people's appetite for and perception of risk. And my wife was just like, oh, you obviously don't know Lucas. and that reminds me of a little bit of sustainability. And we're going to talk about, you know, all sorts of things today. Chris, thank you so much for being willing to host me in this kind of hybrid session. But, you know, there's no mistaking the fact, and I'm going to get to your question, but like, there's no mistaking the fact that sustainability's like had a bit of a cycle over the past few years. And really kind of encapsulated, I would say, the peak of it. You know, some of my years at Microsoft, you know, we rode the peak of kind of public and corporate and just everybody's interest in sustainability. And I would say now we're at a pretty significant, at least local, if not kind of global trough in the sector. And I think it just is so critically important to recognize that just, you know, just like with injuries, it's like, yeah, this sucks. I'm not super stoked about my life right now, if I'm going to be super honest. But that doesn't change kind of my commitment to the things I do and I try to achieve. And I hope that that's the way everybody feels about their work and sustainability right now. It's definitely the way that I feel about my work. You know, it's same. I don't do this, like, I don't jump off of stuff on my skis so that people click on stuff on Instagram, right? I don't do sustainability so that people like write articles about me or give me awards. I do this stuff because it's what I think needs to be done, either for me and my personal emotional health or for the world. And so I hope everybody can just find that within themselves, because, you know, I wrote a piece a while back called Sustainability is Not Special. And it was kind of trying to like get ahead of this, of making people, you know, preparing people for the fact that like not every day is the CEO going to be calling you and asking you what's latest in your program. Like not every day are journalists going to be calling you and asking you, you know, your thoughts. Like, in fact, most people that work at most companies, like the CEO doesn't call them. Journalists don't call them. They just have to get on with doing their jobs. They just have to, you know, as I think about it, it's like it's an accounting assignment, a compliance challenge, kind of a sales solution, and a procurement problem. And those aren't like the most wildly exciting, you know, jobs in the corporate space. That's my personal bias, but that's what sustainability is. And so we have to be able to weather these, you know, attention cycles at the very least, and be able to continue grinding forward on the path. Now, you asked me, you know, when I left Microsoft to private equity, kind of like what surprised me the most, and what assumptions I kind of had to leave at the door. I think when you're in the middle of something like I was at Microsoft, and like a lot of people were that worked in big technology companies and continue to work in big technology companies in the 2019 to 2021 kind of sustainability cycle, it was hard to appreciate, even though you probably told yourself you did, how much attention tech was paying relative to everywhere else. And that doesn't mean that everybody else wasn't talking about this stuff, right? So banking and finance had things like GFANs and, multi-trillions of dollars of assets under management, under commitment for carbon negative, et cetera. But I think what really surprised me when I switched into the world of finance and private equity was just how truly far behind the sector was. A lot of talk that had not really been turned into a lot of action yet. I was lucky enough to start in a new firm, so I didn't have a lot of historical, biases or anything else to deal with. But I was just really shocked looking across the landscape at just how little was kind of actually going on. So that was probably my biggest surprise. It was actually also one of the reasons that I went into private equity. I kind of knew, I was like, wow, I got really lucky to be in technology when the wave, like right before the wave hit. And I kind of wanted to go and try to see if I could find another wave to surf. And I thought that finance was probably a good place to do that because it was obviously so core to the overall climate challenge, but it was also obviously so kind of adolescent in its journey. And so I was really excited about the fact that finance was far behind. I probably underappreciated kind of how far behind it was. So that's what surprised me the most, I think.
That's awesome. Well, I certainly, if there's anybody that's going to overcome an injury or overcome the challenges of sustainability, my money's on you. So I'm sure you will continue to ride that wave. And it's funny you mentioned, the halo or maybe the attention that you had at Microsoft. I think our first conversation, we were talking about a challenge, and I was talking about how to get it done within General Motors. And I asked him, he's like, well, we're just Microsoft. And I'm like, well, I want to just be Microsoft for a day. so I can appreciate the challenge of making the transition. But now one of the things that you talked about is really having an influence now in the finance space. And you're now on a mission to deliver the first net zero portfolio in private equity. So what does that look like in practice? What are the challenges, opportunities, and what are you seeing?
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's funny, when I was leaving Microsoft, they were trying to get me to stay, and trying to figure out the different levers they could pull, and one of the early ones they tried to pull is is basically like like when you leave, you're like when you go to private equity, you're like going into the monastery. Like no one's gonna care. Like no one, and I was like, well, no one cared about me before I started doing this stuff. and it didn't really bother, it didn't keep me up at night that nobody cared about me. Like, didn't stop me from doing the work. Yeah, I mean, I think that's really kind of an important point that I want to just like keep hammering home. And for us at Haveli, you're right. So we're trying to put together the first net zero portfolio in private equity, both for ourselves as a GP, as a firm. We aspired to being net zero from the very beginning, and we would like all of our portfolio companies to be as well by the time of their exit from our portfolio. So by the time we exit our investment in them, that's basically kind of the way that we think about this. So not Haveli specific, but if you think about private equity in general, that means that we have on average somewhere between 3 and 6, let's call it 3 to 6 years to do something with these companies. So the way that we work is probably different than any of the people sitting out here that their organizations work, right? I love to alliterate, so I call it kind of the R's. We have a responsible individual inside of our company that then helps them collect and report the data to us, or record and then report the data to us, and then work on reduction and ultimately removal purchasing. Our whole process starts from the very beginning. So um, when our deal teams are thinking about, they're always thinking about deals, obviously. And when that starts getting kind of more serious, so in our world, we kind of have a series of investment committee meetings where, senior members of the firm, and I'm a voting member of our investment committee. So like when we start taking these deals seriously, are we going to start really spending money on these deals? Are we really going to start putting our time and effort and resources into them? That's when we start looking at these from a sustainability perspective. Now, we invest in primarily gaming, well, entirely in gaming and software companies. We have two separate funds, one that looks after gaming and one that looks after enterprise software. So, in some respects, our sustainability work is not like the world's most complicated work. I'm not trying to decarbonize a Midwestern fracking company, for instance. I still tried to stay within the lane that I know, which is technology, and that I really had the opportunity to learn when I was at Microsoft. So anyway, we go back, we start putting together. We take the publicly available information that we have at the very beginning. If we can figure out things like headcount and revenue and all that, and use really high level estimators of potential carbon emissions. And then as we go along, we get more fine-grained information about that. But ultimately, we assess their interest and ability on this stuff, and then kind of what carbon emissions ultimately we'd be taking on responsibility for as in an asset ownership position. And then when we ultimately close that deal, with the process is basically within the first 90 days, get in touch with that company, find the appropriate directly responsible individual that's going to be our partner. I have teammates at Haveli in our sustainability team that do this all day, every day, that work with them to help, just get them knowledgeable. I mean, most people, the last time that for us in this room or your room, it's like everybody knows everything about carbon and climate and waste and water and whatever. It's easy to forget that the most people's last experience with carbon was a periodic table test in high school chemistry, right? So it's really just getting them up to speed on the vernacular, et cetera, getting them onboarded with the tools that we bring with us to help them do their reporting, and then ultimately helping them build relationships with carbon removal brokers and things like that, all so that we kind of baby step. First we look after scope 1, and then we do scope 1 and 2, and then scope 1, 2, and aspects of scope 3 on this multi-year journey to being able to ultimately purchase as much carbon removal as you emitted across all scopes 1, 2, and 3. And we'll get back to this later, but it's so boring, but it's just about baking this into the budget. If you can get something baked into a budget, Chrissy,
Yeah.
it's like that's the key thing. And so for us, it's taking this multi-year journey, baking this into the budget so that there's, an ability to pay the carbon removal costs of any carbon that remains after reduction efforts.
Excellent. Thank you. So you talked about the fact that your focus areas at Haveli are in the gaming and software space. So, we all are hearing a ton about AI and data centers and all of the energy demands and the challenges there. What's your perspective on where the industry is getting it right? What are they doing well? Where are we falling short? How do you look at this whole transition and growth challenge?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot to say here, I think, obviously, and a lot of people have been saying a lot. It actually brings together two areas that I've spent my career on, which is basically sustainability and AI. I started, for a lot of people don't know, but I started Microsoft Research as a computational scientist working on like AI, applied AI for environmental issues, and then spun that out into a program called AI for Earth and a whole bunch of other stuff that we can talk about later if you want. But if you'll permit me like a tiny bit to just like couch this in my worldview, because I think people are always like, what a weird, strange accident that an environmental scientist ended up in the tech sector working on AI. And I'm like, well, not really. Like that was my plan, and that was my plan because when I was relatively early in my academic career, like everybody else, I got forced to take a bunch of classes I didn't want to take, like economics, and I learned about the four factors of production: land, labor, and capital, and entrepreneurship. And I was also taking all these environmental science classes and a bunch of other stuff. And I was like, man, this is interesting. I don't know why they're not talking about this, but land and labor have always been, the two kind of bedrock aspects of the four factors of production. But like we're all alive at a time when for the first time, when land and labor are both in, and by land economists, right, they're talking about everything. They're not just talking about dirt. They're talking about kind of like all natural resources. And birth rates are falling. And so we actually have to come up with a solution, a new form of capital that allows us to pick up the slack in productivity that land and labor are no longer going to be able to provide. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I'm also like alive at a time when there is this new form of capital called software. And then, a new form of software called AI. And so I was always like, well, man, if we have to decouple environmental degradation from economic growth, then that's the basic architecture that we have to work with. We have to figure out how to deploy new types of capital in order to pick up the slack for land and labor's failings. And so that drove everything. That's why I went into tech. That's why I did all this stuff, right? So like, I'm not a tech apologist in the sense that I like work for tech and then I just figure out why they're doing good work. Like I actually fundamentally think that if we're going to drive economic growth, if we're not going to ultimately result in a degrowth scenario, which is the alternative, and I totally get it. It's just that's not like my plan A, right? So that let's call degrowth plan B, and let's try to figure out plan A. That is new forms of capital, primarily digital, to pick up the slack for land and labor. And what's great about that is we actually figured out how to do that in a way that can decouple like production from degradation, because we have this thing called the cloud, and we have this thing called electricity, and we have this thing called the internet. And so basically you can take these massively complex systems that nobody's ever really even managed to put their heads fully around and simplify it down into like electrons in, bits flip in the middle, and photons go out. And it's this kind of like magic economic box. And the great part about that is photons don't emit any carbon, and they require extremely low amounts of energy to transmit them. And electricity, we actually figured out for the first time a way to produce it in a way that is both price and product superior. And you're like, wow, this is great. Okay, maybe we should like pull this thread a little bit. And so then AI comes along, and it like turbocharges the need for electricity. And I actually think that that is a good thing, or at least it has the potential to be a good thing. And it's also a thing that we can't avoid if you believe my little like four factors of production thing, and if you believe the whole IPCC kind of like path to net zero is basically to decarbonize the world's grids and then electrify and then digitize and then virtualize a lot of the world's economy. So anyway, like we need a lot more electricity. We need to fundamentally transform the way our electricity grids are built and deployed and power is generated and put onto them, et cetera, et cetera. We were never going to do that. Never. We were never going to do that without somebody sending a massive shock into the system. And AI did that. And the good news is that the shock is coming from people that have more money than anyone's ever had in the history of the world. And I'm talking about the Mag 7 and some of these other AI companies. And it's coming from people that have the most ambitious sustainability targets in the
Yeah,
world, right?
true.
To be net zero, to not just to be net zero, but to have 100% renewable electricity. And they're coming from organizations that have built up probably some of, if not the best, smartest kind of energy procurement teams in the entire world. So that's all really, really, really good. That does not mean that we can't screw this up. We totally can screw this up. I'm just saying that if I were going to put together the little package that to minimize our chance of screwing up, it would be the big tech guys saying that they need tons of electricity and being willing to spend that money and having the entire world's eyes on them and expectations on them. So, and also a little funny story that, or not funny story, but like thing that people don't really appreciate. These companies are the largest buyers of renewable energy in the world, which is probably going to be the only way that they're ever able to meet any of the AI driven electricity demand. Not because of sustainability or anything else, but just because of the rapid ability to deploy this technology relative to, like a 20,
Yeah.
year coal plant, like, build out or whatever else. But the only reason that they're good at this stuff at all, the only reason they ever did any of this was for sustainability. It was the sustainability team. So I hope everybody in the room is feeling like actually really good about themselves. The only reason that tech is like able to even entertain the multi-gigawatt demands that they need and the build out is because sustainability inside these companies pushed them when they didn't have to take voluntary action to buy unbundled, probably entirely unadditional renewable energy credits with a small team of one or two people. And now those teams have grown to hundreds. They're buying renewable energy in massively innovative contractual ways around the world. Okay, so that's all good. Where are they getting it wrong? Honestly, like, I think their narrative sucks. Like, they don't seem to understand like what a big deal this is. They don't seem to understand that electricity will be one of the top three, if not the top, issues at the polls in the coming years. They don't seem to understand just how price sensitive the average American, European, and other consumers actually are to tariff increases. They don't seem to understand any of that. They don't have a narrative. I'm not saying my narrative is right, but they don't have a narrative like mine that basically says, this is good. Like, we need this stuff. They basically are on their back foot playing defense. And I think you'll probably want to talk about some of the stuff that they're talking about with like climate solutions of AI and all that. Like, we can talk about that, but like they don't have a good narrative. So
No.
that's where I think they're really, really losing.
Yeah, no, I think it's a huge opportunity. And I mean, certainly the additionality and robustness of renewables and what that potentially can enable. As an engineer who found her way into sustainability, I can appreciate the tech aspect and certainly opportunities to look at it in a positive spirit and opportunity. So speaking of opportunities, as you look at AI and a tool, for making ESG strategies more credible, how are you using it or applying it with, your portfolio companies?
Oh, like everything else I do, I'm using it in a very boring way. Like, I think what's so cool about AI, and just on that past topic, right? Most of the industry narrative right now is like, yeah, 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 like we're building more gas turbines or something, but like, look, a squirrel, like, AI is going to solve climate change somehow, new materials or carbon capture, whatever. I don't even know what they're talking about. But like, the point is it's like, yeah, sure, maybe, but like, you actually have to do something to make that true. You can't just say like it might, and you're like, yeah, sure, it might, but like you definitely are building that data center there. So what are you doing to help turn it from like possible?
Uh-oh. What a great freeze frame. Oh, you're back. Oh, maybe. Looks like it froze on his end. I don't know if you can still hear us, Lucas, but you froze here. Oh, oh, that was so much fun. We good?
Can you hear me?
Okay, now we can. Can you hear us?
I can. Yeah, yeah. Sorry,
Okay, all right.
I don't know about that.
I hope somebody got a picture of the freeze frame.
Though they're usually the best. It's always
it was a good one.
it's always my most flattering. But anyway, so I'll skip whatever I was saying, and I'll just say that like for ESG integration, like sustainability teams, in my experience, maybe other people in the room have a different experience, but in my experience, are always under resourced. You never have enough people. You always have too many like demands, and most of those demands are actually to do things that everyone complains about and that AI is really good at. It's about filling out forms. It's about summarizing information across massive reports. It's about doing all that kind of stuff. And then you never get around to doing the fun stuff, like actually figuring out how to reduce carbon because you just spent the past 60 hours of the last week filling out the latest CDP report or whatever. Um, we use AI for a lot of that, a lot of that. And then to make sure, so we build trackers that make sure for every one of our companies that things are happening. It's just like all the manual work that sustainability requires, the form filling, the box checking, the checking in, the aggregation of metrics, et cetera, to build those benchmarks. We're using AI to do all of that,
Right.
and that makes our small, lean team much more capable of focusing on the things that actually matter, which is trying to reduce carbon and trying to buy carbon removal.
Awesome. All right, so, you talked about, in fact, you just mentioned, that sustainability teams never have enough budget, never have enough people, always too much to do. I will tell you, coming from product development, manufacturing, quality launch, it's no different. Everywhere, teams feel the same. But this is a unique space, and there certainly are some positives. What advice would you give to the leaders in the room of how to manage some of those challenges, or where do you see the most opportunity for us to continue to lead and continue to inspire and actually do work?
Yeah, I think for me, it's a few things. Like one, understanding what we talked about at the top, like sustainability is not special, or at least it's not always going to be special. But two, I think the most important thing I would love to see sustainability teams use this maybe like down cycle to embrace is a return to owning your own corporate sustainability strategy. Because I think that we have gone way overboard in outsourcing our strategy to third party organizations and their commitment frameworks and their reporting frameworks and all of this kind of stuff. And that stuff's all important, but oftentimes it really distracts from, creating your own strategy that is actually tied to your own company's corporate competencies. And so you have these things of like, you're getting pressured from third parties to do this thing or that thing. And it's like, you just know inherently that's not your management team culture, right? Maybe it's a marketing company and they want to hear marketing stuff, or maybe it's an engineering company and they really want to get deep into the engineering weeds or whatever, but like you're getting pressed to go and do policy advocacy. I'm not here to say policy advocacy isn't super important. I'm just saying not all companies want or should be doing that. And I think this moment right now is a great time for sustainability leaders to step back and be like, okay, I don't mean this in a bad way, but like you're kind of at a point in the world where like nobody cares. Nobody cares about what you do. Nobody cares about you. Like, and so you can go back and you can say, okay, well, if I were going to do this out of the limelight, how would I do it? And how would I do it in a way that would make this company put it as a core of its corporate identity? And the only way that you're going to make this issue core to your corporate's identity is by tying it to whatever your company's corporate identity actually is. And at Microsoft, we did that. We said we wanted to be the leading platform, cloud platform provider of solutions for our customers and partners. We used every aspect because basically, like, little insider story, like Satya, the CEO of Microsoft, has a one slide uh, a one slide deck that he uses at the start of every Friday SLT meeting. And it just talks about Microsoft's mission and then a bunch of like how it goes to market and then its values. And when we started, sustainability was not on that slide. And when we ended, sustainability was at the top as part of its mission. It was in all the line items of how we went to market with customers and partners, and it was at the bottom in our core values. And the reason that it was that way was because we tied it to what we were as a company. We were a cloud software company, and so we sold it that way. And there was a lot of other people that wanted us to do other stuff, and I got that, and I took the feedback. But like, if you want to make sustainability sustainable in your company, you have to tie it to its core corporate identity. And third parties that force one size fits all solutions on companies, like it makes it really hard to do that. And so I would just advocate everyone to take this opportunity to be like, oh, this is kind of nice. Like everyone's not questioning every single decision that I'm making right now. So how would I change the decisions given that freedom?
Yeah, no, great advice. Any tips on how to get the stakeholders in the company to embrace that and include it as part of the strategy?
Well, I'm probably not saying anything outside of like collaboration 101 here, but I think I've always been very specific in how I approach these, and I've been very specific in my guidance to the teams I work with on how I want them to approach this, which is that every meeting, you need to go into that meeting understanding what it is that that person is supposed to be doing. Right? And what they're supposed to be doing is not helping you, by the way. What they're supposed to be doing is solving the budget problem. What they're supposed to be doing is delivering the product on time. What they're supposed to be doing is innovating the new product. What they're supposed to be doing is keeping regulators off your backs. Like those are the things that they're supposed to be doing. So I would always expect people to basically have done a deep dive pre-read kind of on like, what metrics, how is this person going to be compensated this year? And I want you to figure out how to position this conversation and this ask in a way that helps them be compensated.
Yeah.
And if you can do that, like, and that's always been, I hate the term like superpowers or whatever, but like, because I don't think it's superpower, it just comes from like trying really hard. But that's the thing I would always like, tell people is like, you tell me somebody and their comp structure, and I promise you I will figure out a way to make what we're trying to get done align with their comp structure. And I think that ethos, it definitely wasn't me because mostly all I did was like send emails,
Yeah,
and that's
I
all I
think it's
still
super
really do.
important
But
to meet people where they're at and understand what their objectives and missions are
yeah,
and help them understand how this plays into it. So fantastic. So Lucas, thank you so much for joining us virtually. I know it's not easy. We certainly hope you're on the road to recovery soon and that we'll see you back in person at some future event. But take care of yourself and thanks for the conversation.
thank you so much.